The DTC Growth Show.
Welcome to the DTC Growth Show, presented by Banknotes, minted by #paid, where we talk about all things e-commerce, retail, and D2C. My name is Ian, and today I'm joined by my friend and all-around marketing and product all-star, Andy Rosenberg, for a unique episode where we're going to break down marketing lessons that can be learned from the rise and fall of athletic brand AND1. Hey, Andy.
Hey, Ian, it's great to be on the show. All-star, that's way too kind. I would say the 92 All-Star team is really what we should be talking about. I miss those days.
Yeah, so for those listening and maybe not going to watch the video, I'm wearing an NBA All-Star 92 shirt, which is probably like one of the iconic kind of jerseys for the All-Star game, and the shirt's from Homage, which is like a really cool t-shirt company out of Columbus, Ohio. But basically the genesis for Andy and I just getting together for like kind of a unique episode of this DTC Growth Show is just there's been two documentaries recently about AND1. And for those who don't know, AND1 is a brand started in the 90s, was really about street ball and streetwear and kind of getting back to the street ball roots of basketball, the playground game. And most recently, there was an episode of Untold on Netflix that dove into like the rise and fall of AND1, and it really just got me thinking. There are like a ton of marketing lessons in what I watched in that like an hour and 20 minutes. And I thought, Andy, you're from the tri-state area like myself. I was like a gym rat growing up. I played a lot of ball during the summers, and just like kind of really thought it was super interesting, like with the parallels there between like what happened at AND1 and like just things that we can learn today with marketing.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I'm 5'7" on a good day, so my point guard career was cut short right around middle school, high school. I played soccer, but I always tried to compete. I miss those days; those were super fun. I remember when AND1 came out, and all my friends ran out and got it right away, and we felt awesome. And while my jump shot needed a lot of work, at least I could talk the talk and kind of walk the walk up to a certain point when I was wearing AND1.
Yeah, I think like the first thing I want to bring up is like there's this whole idea of like the super consumer, right? Or the super fan, the super consumer, the super user, and I think like AND1 did such a great job of like understanding who its audience was and just diving like so deep into that and understanding like we weren't about the basketball purist. We weren't about like Naismith and like why are they allowing the dunk? Like we're about the Rutger. We're about the street ball. We're literally about like the urban roots of basketball, and I think their ability to dive into that, particularly in a time like where the NBA was like David Stern in the NBA was going through a lot with like tattoos and going through like Allen Iverson was coming in and was being termed a quote unquote thug at the time, right? And there was a lot going on in terms of like backlash against like, so let's be completely honest, of like the NBA getting too urban, and AND1 just like said, you know what, like those shoppers are our core and they're our super consumer. Like let's dive wholeheartedly into that.
Yeah, and what makes that even more amazing, looking back at it now, they didn't have Facebook data to spit out and look at, or targeting abilities to make this pretty big leap and assumption. They had obviously Wharton to help out with, and then they're coming out. But they really, understood the culture of basketball, and I think that's what separated them from a lot of the blandness in the category at the time. Which eventually, as we see in the Untold documentary, Nike eventually catches up to. And, but before that point, they were going out a little bit on a limb, but had a really great gut sense of where this would fit in the product market. They started selling out of their trunks, which I thought, is a great underdog story that everyone loves. I think, DTC today, we might have to start doing that as well if we can't improve some of these efficiencies right now. But I like that mentality and that spirit, and I think that's something to take away from both those documentaries into how we can apply this in the crazy landscape that we see post iOS 14.5 today. I had to get that iOS 14.5 plug in early. Shout out to Apple for making things chaotic.
Yeah, or I think like it's super interesting because like this was an apparel brand, eventually got into sneakers. I mean, they signed Stephon Marbury as like their first, to wear their sneakers initially. And yet, to your point, like they weren't working in digital. There was no Facebook. There was no Google. Like I'm like I'm someone as a marketer who's always like complaining about like, oh, the space is so crowded now. Like good luck cutting, like getting in, getting kind of awareness or eyes on your product in such a crowded market, regardless of what the vertical is. And yet these guys were like, they didn't have digital, they didn't have Facebook, they didn't have any of these channels that we have now. And yet they were at one point, they were second to Nike and were the top rated television show on ESPN beyond SportsCenter. Like, I mean, it's an incredible story. And I guess for me, it just like reminds me like, do, if you're good at your job and you have a good product, there's still ample kind of greenway there for you to get your product in front of the right people.
Well, and like, I don't know if AND1 could exist today, starting from scratch, based off of how they went about starting the brand. They weren't going on TikTok, they weren't going on Instagram and finding micro influencers, right? Or up and coming talent, or even like a major basketball TikTok star. They were going to Rucker Park. They were going to different basketball courts across the country to find the talent they knew would captivate live audiences, but also have that transfer on to national audiences. And so I just don't know if that would happen today. I think there are a lot of ways that we currently go about where we take the digital and we try to apply it into a solution for a national audience. And the heart and soul of AND1 was actually knowing that collective group of super niche local audiences that truly had a passion for basketball. And that was the common denominator there, and really led, most of the early brand decisions, and also ultimately made it pretty tough to scale, as we see towards the end of the documentaries. These homegrown stars eventually realized that they were stars too, and they did a good job in trying to combat that, but that's going to happen as you scale as a company, and they grew their own influencers essentially and created the platform for them.
Yeah. I mean, I think there's so much to unpack there. I mean, I think to your point, like to win the micro community of, for them, it was really like the tri-state area. Like they didn't even go out west, right? Like they weren't even touching like the basketball communities in California or anything. And then ultimately, like, yeah, there is still this sense of like, if you could win the metros, then the rest of the country will kind of follow suit and start to glom onto it. But yeah, I mean, it's hard to, it's really interesting. But yeah, I mean, I mean, you brought up the idea of like making their own influencers. I mean, I think that's another aspect is like the basketball players became the influencers. And it really kind of the end, and for those who haven't watched it yet, like the end of the Untold, there was some friction between the basketball players who were on the AND1 tour and the management. And ultimately, the company was acquired and the founders made quite a bit of coin. And, one of the founders said, like, in retrospect, he wishes the players were not contract, but rather employees, so that they could have made out with that acquisition some, and they didn't. And I think it really just brings about like a really interesting question of like how influencers and creators are being used and are. I really don't even know what the question is. It just really was just a really interesting take of how like this was even this was an issue back in the early '90s, mid '90s, where the influencers were helping raise the brand, but maybe didn't always have a stake in the brand.
Didn't have a stake in the brand, and outside of the brand, they didn't have a huge platform to raise their own profiles the way that creators and influencers do today, right? So they weren't growing their own social media. I don't know. Yeah, no, I mean, we're still talking 2004, 2005. This is right when Facebook is coming onto the scene, or because I was, I'm dating myself, but my first year over at NYU was when Facebook was launching. So they still had to build. They were still tied to AND1 to help raise their profile. As you see, when Reebok gets involved and ultimately Nike, that's when it becomes a bigger challenge. So it's actually other brands that were, really bringing the heat on for AND1 versus in today's, landscape, we see a lot of creators, some start on their own and the brand follows or comes after their fame, right? Which is a much different process. I'm really interested currently right now on brands that are, celebrity packaged goods, for example, how that's coming into the market currently. You're dealing with an audience already that has millions and millions of followers and launching the product second. I think if AND1 had tried to do that today, I don't know if it could be done. This is why I think, again, how they went and took that localized approach. The equity component is complicated, right? I think there are learnings there, but these are also just 3 to 4 guys straight out college who really don't know anything about that. This is before influencers and creator marketing as it is existed altogether. Sure, you had the NBA athletes of the world and sponsorships, and there's a lot of great material right now on Converse courting, Magic and Larry, ultimately Jordan going, with, as well with Nike. I've been watching a lot of basketball. There's a lot of great basketball content right now. But, I think AND1 was saying, hey, like, we need to build this brand from the ground up. We're going to take this talent with us and we're going to have this talent grow. But I don't think they anticipated just how quickly the talent would grow with them. And that ultimately, became a challenge, I think, towards the end. And today it'd be much more complicated because I think the talent would already have a lot of built-in audiences and metrics to send back to say, hey, like, I think there are companies right now where this current problem exists and shows itself. Peloton being a great example of, trying to keep these really popular instructors top of mind. But they're also competing with each other with social metrics and how people are taking their classes, and all of it's married. So I think it was such an interesting time for a company like AND1 to launch. I'm not sure, and this is like a question I'd love like the audience to say: could AND1 launch today, in this, in any form? I think that's tough.
Yeah, I think that's a super, super good point. And I think like back to the utilizing influencers and could it happen today? I mean, I think one of the things that the documentary shows is like, hey, these were street ballers. They really didn't have any opportunity to play in the NBA. I mean, their days were over in terms of playing largely. And through AND1, they got to stay at these great hotels. They got to travel internationally. And that was sort of in addition to like signing contracts, and that was like the carrier, right? Like, I got all these opportunities, I got all that thanks to AND1. If you kind of juxtapose that against today, that's not enough. The brand just can't come and say like over at #paid, where we talk about like, you can't get paid in product, right? Like you have value as the creator promoting the brand. So like, that wouldn't happen today. It wouldn't happen like, you get all the AND1 shirts and all the AND1 swag and we're going to put you in these hotels. Like, no, I'm helping your bottom line by X and I expect a percentage of that. And that's what, and we've all just become more educated in how that world should work.
Yeah, I mean, I think athletes used to be on a certain pedestal, right, where they knew their value, they knew that they would be able to get these endorsement deals, and we kept sponsorship deals, right, for brands to a very isolated, unique group of people who already had this fame built in by TV exposure, built in by performance, in terms of on the court, not on social, not in terms of earned media value. I mean, earned media value is a completely different thing than what it is today. And so it really gave a lot of, I think AND1 really gave a lot of, voice and attention, as you mentioned, to players who weren't going to be able to make the NBA, create these star talents, and invested in them through the product, right? Through the brand itself. And I don't know how, like, that's not a bad thing, but I think they couldn't see just how popular it would get and how much of it hinged on these personalities. People were coming out to these stadiums that were selling out to see the professor, to see, these personalities that had long just been street legends scale and grow across the country. And I think that's ultimately where it got to this inflection point where they couldn't balance the national attention with the localized popularity that was built into the roots of the brand.
Sure. So, for all of us, marketers, and going back to our marketing roots and like a fun, not fun exercise of like the SWOT, right? Like one of my things was at the end of this episode was the big T, the big threat was Nike. And then ultimately Nike comes out with, I think it was 2001, comes out with, basically, in my opinion, the best basketball commercial ever made. And if, for anyone listening, watching, just kind of go on YouTube, look up 2001 Nike street ball commercial. But basically, it's choreography. I mean, it's amazing. It's like just great basketball dribbling exposition, display. But it was just amazing, and it was basically just Nike putting its stake in the ground, saying we're here, like we're gonna take you on in terms of this street ball kind of culture and this audience and this market, and they knew they were done after that. They knew they were shot. And I think no matter how good you are, and I guess I kind of bring it back. Like we have the Amazons of the world and Netflix back and going down a little bit, but there are these big players who are always just like at any given point they could decide, yeah, what you're doing really well, I want to do that, and I'm gonna take it. And I think like that was a threat that was almost unavoidable. Like, yeah, I don't know what they could have done.
Legacy retailers, legacy brands, right? I think we're seeing a very similar moment right now in that, one of the biggest threats to DTC at the moment are legacy retailers who are building up their e-com branches. They're taking a reverse path. So much of DTC started with e-com and now is going to brick and mortar retail. And now you have a bunch of legacy retailers who are still the giant whales in the ocean swallowing the guppies up because they have the dollars and they have the margin capabilities and the efficiencies or the ability to be inefficient to make all of this happen. And I think, when Nike came in, Nike, I believe, was Wieden Kennedy at the time. I could be wrong.
Yeah, it was.
Yeah, so it was Wieden Kennedy. I mean, I would have killed to join Wieden Kennedy coming out of NYU in 2008. It was like the dream ad job. They had the budget, they had the money, and they had the notoriety. And they built that. I shouldn't even say notoriety because that has a negative connotation. But they had everything, the tool set they needed to just say, hey, look at this smaller fish in the ocean. Look what they've built. We're going to take our ad dollars and we're going to basically, apply it to our legacy brand. And guess what? That's business, and that's what we're facing right now. And I think the key thing here is, a question: how could AND1 have safeguarded themselves from that? Probably knowing someone at Wieden Kennedy who would have leaked the information that this was going to happen. Yeah. Outside of that, I think it was going to be very tough. And I think a lot of companies, when they're faced with decisions of, hey, do we sell the company? Hey, how do we scale this? Do we take an additional investment? It's to compete against those moments. And it's very hard. I don't know if AND1, I think one thing the documentaries fail to kind of really address, did they really not see this coming, or were there further opportunities to get out a little bit earlier ahead of Nike, or and then a follow-up to that, could they have even anticipated the cataclysmic effect that would happen? You can dictionary check if I've said that the right way, or I made up words. Sometimes I do that. For Nike to come in and just do this at that moment, and could they see it? This would have such a negative impact on the brand. I think one way to rationalize that could have been, this will gain more credibility for street ball. Sure. But they didn't see that halo effect. We love to toss around that word halo effect. Well, Nike just said, hey, we're going to take the ball from you, no pun intended, and we're going to run with it. And that was ultimately the end.
Yeah, I did get a sense of and I don't know how much of it was just the culture at the time, the lack of digital media, but the one thing that shocked me, and I don't remember what year it was, but the epic Vince Carter slam dunk contest performance year, and he was wearing AND1 sneakers, and they weren't paying him, but he wasn't officially endorsing them, and there was no news around that, there was no if that happened today. And the best slam dunk artist of all time in the NBA was wearing, a brand. So there was almost a naivete there of how to leverage that. It was just almost at least the sense in the documentary was oh, cool. It was just a product placement. And maybe that was a fork in the road where they were really hey, if we had Vince Carter in our camp, we went that way and we signed him and whatever. And instead it was just Nike, and they did what Nike does.
Yeah, I mean, one of the issues there today that happens, it's amplified across social. It's played thousands of views, 5 minutes right after it happens, and it lives on at least for a couple of days. When it happened back then, it's just a moment in time. That's cool, but it's word of mouth. It doesn't get much more exposure
Right.
than it does in the moment. So it's much more difficult, I think. And you know, the athletic world in general is just very tough. A lot of these athletes have exclusive contracts with apparel providers, so that, you know, I don't know what Vince's deals were at the moment at that point, but a lot of them can't even wear another brand because Nike
Sure.
or Adidas locks them in. So, you know, you could not create a groundswell around that moment. You know, brand marketers would kill for that today in terms of that two words that we always say, brand awareness. Well, what better way, like you said, than to have arguably the greatest dunker of all time in your shoes, but there was no way to amplify that message and let it live on. And I think that really hurt AND1 at the time. So as exciting as it was for them, it kind of lived in an echo chamber.
Yeah. So, I mean, I think as we're coming up on 20 minutes, I think this is the perfect kind of snack size,
Oh,
a conversation
my
on
mind.
this. Oh, best out the snacks. There you go. So, there you go. Yeah.
There we go. I know you're a fan of Bucks. I'm going to try the professional salt and vinegar. Shout out to Sam for sending these my way. Not really sponsored. I think you have to disclose that, right? But Ian, what are you going to grab?
Oh, yeah. I think I have up here, I have some hot chocolate puffs.
Oh, I love those. Those are good.
Yeah, tasty these. But as we're eating our fups, making a lot of crinkle noise on audio. What would be, I'll start while you're chewing. What would be two takeaways? For me, two takeaways that a DTC brand can kind of take away from this now to learn from. And I think for me, it is, one is like treat your influencers well, treat your creators well, treat your partners well. And I think that was a big kind of overarching theme was that they were seen like the players were seen as employees, but weren't actually employees, and almost seemed like, oh, they should be grateful for what they're getting here instead of being like true partners of the brand. And that came back to bite them in the butt a little bit. The second piece for me is I think like we just touched on is just the threat aspect. I mean, I think like I joke around about the SWOT analysis. It's sort of annoying. It's not fun to do, but I mean that was a true threat, and maybe they were. I mean, they knew Nike was out there. But regardless, they weren't prepared for it, and who knows if that was something they could have prepared for. But yeah, so I mean, those are sort of my two takeaways.
Yeah, I think for me, maybe an underappreciation of retention of existing employees. There was a little bit that happens, but there was a little bit of friction. And as soon as you saw, one or two team members deviate and move or become less interested in the business, they had a very negative quarter, right, in terms of the shoe design or that. So I think that's something that, it's very hard to keep a startup and team together, but value those moments, even if, at times, the business leagues having that experience within your ecosystem is invaluable when there's those tough moments. Because you can always learn to pivot from having someone in the organization that was there from day one. So I think a little bit of that's more touching on the founder relationships, and that's something that I took away from it. Really, just having that same consistent team to navigate those waters. And then I think ultimately also diversification of marketing channels. AND1 was limited in how they could, but they did reach out early to retail partners, third party, retail was huge for them, getting in, at the Foot Actions of the world, having out of house signage in these locations to really create that brand presence, to make them feel bigger than they actually were in the beginning, I think is huge. And I think as a lot of startups are trying to compete with those juggernauts right now, having a great little bit of out of house, advertising doesn't hurt. A lot of companies are scared to do it because you can't measure it at the moment. You can with certain partners, but I think AND1 did a really good job of making themselves appear bigger than they already were. And then combining that with a lot of their efforts, within, the courts of the East Coast, were able to grow as a brand faster, probably than they should have.
Well, cool. Well, Andy, this was awesome conversation. Thanks for joining me. We'll have to do it again.
Oh, for sure. Thanks, Ian. I had a blast. We'll have
Awesome.
to hoop it up sometime too.
Yeah, or soccer. I'm
It'll
a
be
big
an ugly
soccer
sight,
fan
but
too.
you
Yeah.
know, we'll be getting
All right.
pain medicine sponsorships
Yeah.
after that one.
All right. We'll see you.
All right, take care.